I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here today with Dr. Iris Freelander, as usual, and we're here to discuss with you today why worry. In metaphysical New Thought philosophy, we talk so much about the fact that we live in our minds and the importance and reality of the fact that our lives and our world are really created by our way of thinking. And so this program is dedicated to inviting you to a new and different way of thinking, a way of looking at life through the dynamic of your mind and the manner in which your mind reacts to the circumstances and situations of life. Worry is kind of a widespread, deeply permeating problem, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And we all are subject to that because we all borrow. If we don't have worry of our own, we borrow it, it seems. And the faith would be the opposite of worry. And one time, my sister Avis prided herself on worrying about everyone. And she always said, I was so worried about you. I worry. And she was always saying that. And my dad said, Avis, do you realize that you're showing lack of faith in God when you say you worry? And she says, I never thought of it that way. And so she stopped professing such worry, great worry, and I'm sure she was happier as a consequence. But isn't it true that we borrow worry if we don't, and we think it's a way of showing that we care?
In many cases, it is. And like so many things in our minds and in our life experience, this behavior is acquired
Yeah.
and it's learned. And as we learn it, many of us get better and better at it. And so we begin to become deeper and deeper and more proficient worriers. And we then project to others and we encourage others to worry. And I think one of the important things to remember about worry is that it is a learned behavior. It is a learned dynamic of mind. And since it is learned, then we can learn to do something else. We can condition ourselves to do something else. And you're absolutely right, and I totally agree with the fact that people need to look at the source of their worry and also the dynamic of whether or not they are worriers and look briefly, not very long, because so often we spend a lot of time in analysis. And I think we analyze far too much. So we don't need to analyze very much. We need to analyze only to the extent of identifying what's going on in our lives or in the lives of those we're working with. And then once we identify that and identify that a problem or a reality exists, then the dynamic shifts from analysis into action to resolve that issue. And I think that we need to look at our lives and look at the way our minds operate. And if we're a worrisome person, if we're a person who worries a lot, then we need to look at why it is that we feel the need to worry. So often people will tell us in counseling that I'm just by nature a worrier. Or even worse, they'll say, I come from a family of worriers, which is true because the behavior is learned. And then they expect or look to other people to worry. And I think last Sunday when I was speaking, I was talking about a little episode that I saw of two people talking, and one person saying to the other, very much the same as your sister, saying, well, aren't you worried? And the other person said, well, no. But then as the person began to respond to this person who said, aren't you worried? They indeed thought, well, maybe I should be worried. And so that dynamic is contagious and always creates a detriment to us, because worry, for the most part, has to do with things that are anticipated that may never happen. So it is a dynamic of projecting into the future and essentially borrowing or buying ahead of time grief, or it's looking into the past and relating past experiences to potential future experiences. And in many cases, that becomes then a self-fulfilling prophecy. And faith is really a fundamental part of being able to begin to deal with the problem of worry. Because when we move into the issue of faith, whatever an individual's faith tradition is, but move into the spiritual realm, and again, it doesn't have to do with denomination, it doesn't have to do with religion or church, but it has to do with having an individual connect with the fact that they are really a child of God. And as a child of God, there is a divine source, and that divine source is creating an opportunity for them to deal with circumstances and situations. And so faith begins that process.
Yes. And when people know that they have that divine connection, then they're not going to be worried. And also when people realize that it's not exactly admirable to worry, then they won't. And it's just like grief. I've heard people, as I was growing up in Kentucky, people would say, well, so-and-so relative didn't even cry at that memorial service. And so they expect people to express their grief. They expect people to express their worry. And certain areas of the country, I think it's more like that than others. But we all fall into that trap of thinking that that's how we show our concern for people and our love for people. And so we can not express in that way and be far happier, far healthier, far more strong. And again, as you said, faith is the answer, isn't it?
It is. And then worry, of course, which you touched upon, and I think we should spend a little time talking about the impact of worry on our lives, our mental life, our physical life, and our spiritual life. But there is a cost of worry from the physical standpoint. And I think we need to really understand that so many negative emotions and so many things that take place in our minds that are of a negative nature, such as worry, have physical consequences. And those physical consequences precipitate or contribute to physical illnesses. And I don't think we need to dwell on that too much, because so many people then decide that every physical ailment has some psychological root. And I'm not saying that at all, nor am I saying that every illness has a spiritual root. But I am saying that there is a physical dynamic to worry, and that physical dynamic creates a depression within us mentally, and it creates depression from a physiological standpoint as well.
Well, I was talking with a physicist this weekend, and we were saying, he was talking about illness, and I said, well, I think every illness is caused by lack of the immune system being perfect, functioning in the way that it needs to. And he agreed. And, you know, a lot of scientists today are saying that, doctors are saying that, people are saying that. And it's more or less true. When our bodies get out of balance because of some negativity in our lives, whether it's worry, fear, anger, any negativity causes our body to not function to perfection, and then it causes the force centers in our body to function less than well, and then it manifests in the physical body. And clairvoyantly, illness can be seen in the higher bodies before it manifests in the physical. So if we know that all the negativity that we heap on ourselves through our own minds, our own thinking, is creating a problem physically, then we'd be less apt to allow that to happen.
The impact from a physical standpoint, and you talked about the body centers and life centers, maybe we spend a few minutes talking, even though that's not directly related to worry. Worry certainly contributes in many cases to the imbalance of our physical life centers.
Right.
And it's one of the contributors. And you spoke of several, fear and anger and a variety of others that manifest themselves in our physical being and bring about an uncentered presence. And we talk a lot in this program about the reality of being centered. And for many people, that, especially in the West, it is a somewhat new philosophy. And especially from a spiritual dynamic, for those from the West, it's a new spiritual dimension to discuss centering, and centering of the physical body, and centering of the spiritual body, and centering of the mental bodies as well. And when we begin the process of centering all of those things, not weighing one more valuable than the others, but looking at a centering presence and a centering activity of our being, then good things begin to happen, and we begin to repair our mind, our body, and our spiritual being. So let's talk about those life centers.
Well, we have 7 major centers, and they're located over the 7 major endocrine glands. And as we balance those out, and you spoke of centering, as we center ourselves and balance ourselves with Creator God, then we're balancing those 7 centers. And there's many books and so forth, information available about books, tapes, lectures, seminars, and so forth about the chakras, about the 4 centers, and they're called CHAKRA, chakra. And so as those are balanced, then our bodies are more healthy. And as we worry or have any other negativity expressing in our higher bodies, in our minds, then it changes the energy of the physical body and causes it then to not function well. And there's ways we can, other ways we can balance besides just centering ourselves with Creator God, and that would be exercise, a physical exercise of any kind. It would be thinking of affirmations. We do affirmations. You have us do affirmations at the church all the time, and that's a wonderful way of centering, of getting our minds in one pointed. And we need to keep our minds one pointed and not going into all kinds of different thoughts at the same time. Because when we have jumbles of thoughts, then we don't have effective thoughts.
And so often when we worry, that's exactly what happens.
Yes.
Our minds go from one point to the other, all or much of which is negative.
Yeah.
And we get into the what ifs and the ought to be's and all of the things. And when we do that, we step out of the present moment. We step out of our centering presence. We step into confusion, and we step into an environment that is counterproductive to all of our bodies and has an impact. So, and then of course, one other method that we could talk about very briefly before we get back to worrying is meditation. And
Yes,
I
of
think
course.
for those, again, from the traditional Western religious traditions, it is a new dynamic, but it's wonderfully being integrated
Yes.
into all faith traditions, and we're really excited about that.
Yes, it is. And as you know, I've been meditating for more than 50 years, and to me, it's held my life together. And like everyone else on earth, I've gone through a lot of trauma, a lot of problems. But I think meditation is what's kept me centered, kept me going, and kept me from being unhealthy.
And so meditation is a great technique for dealing with worry and dealing with the negative aspects of life. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some information so that you can continue your study of the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you today.
We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the new thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a free copy of one of these booklets. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807. Whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can reach it through Confident Living.
Before the break, we were talking about ways of dealing with negative emotions, including the issues of worry. And we were talking about the impact of meditation and the ability that it brings to us to soothe our consciousness and to contribute to our centering presence. A part of meditation, I think, is the attribute of being in the present moment. And when we begin to meditate, it is helpful to be in the present moment and to be in the present moment experience. And our need to be in the present is really a way to combat the reality of worry, isn't it?
Yes.
Because as we're in the present moment and as we're conscious of where we are in this moment, we then begin to look at the circumstances and situations as challenges that need to be dealt with, as opposed to what ifs in terms of tomorrow. So being in the present is tremendously important.
That would be keep your consciousness in present time and forgive are two of the things we've been taught that are most essential for health and happiness. And I believe that's true. As you said, keep your consciousness in present time. And if we have anything that we're worrying about, then it's causing us that we've not forgiven someone for, or ourselves. And very often we berate ourselves, and we don't forgive ourselves for things that are not, that don't need forgiveness, don't merit it. So if we can just again, exercise faith in God and know that everything that happens for a reason and happens for good, and good will come of that. And sometimes it seems very inhumane, perhaps, to think that good will come of terrible circumstances. But we've seen it happen over and over, haven't we?
We have. And so fundamental to New Thought teaching is the reality of God as divine mind, or the source of infinite intelligence. And when we learn techniques, and that's exactly what this program and New Thought and metaphysical philosophy is all about, when we learn the techniques and abilities that we have to connect our mind with divine mind, to connect our human mind with the spiritual dynamic of divine mind, then we don't begin, but we are then guided to right action and right thought in the midst of every circumstance and situation. And that takes us right out of the worry dilemma. And I think that's a tremendously important aspect to understand, is that connectiveness and the ability that we have to be connected. And it's really, there's no hocus pocus or mystical, magical thing about it. It is an issue of consciousness. When we are consciously connected with the presence and the power of the infinite, then divine mind and our mind come together as one. And one of the things in the moments that we have left that we definitely need to touch upon, and you brought it up just a moment ago, that has to do with self-esteem and
Yeah.
self-worth. And in almost every aspect of negative thinking and living, the root cause comes from low self-esteem and a low self-image. And we know from psychological studies and sociological studies and spiritual studies, all kinds of studies, that low self-esteem is one of the things that plagues us as persons and is tremendously devastating, especially to those of us in the developed and competitive Western world. And so in the United States, we have a tremendous problem with self-esteem. And so much that we're doing is compensating for our own feelings of inadequacy. And that feeds into the aspect of worry. And those who are self-confident and those who have self-value, and that comes from understanding that every one of us are children of God, endowed with the same abilities and the same direction and the same value of human and spiritual worth. Doesn't matter what race we are, what religion we are, socioeconomic boundaries are all gone in that reality, that we're all children of God. Then that issue changes for us, our whole issue of consciousness. And that is a magnificent aspect and dynamic of positive thinking that can change our lives and help us to step out of this worrisome situation.
Exactly. And those words are worth their weight in gold, because when we know that we are part of Creator God, and there's a word for it, it's the monad aspect of our own beinghood. And that is that the Holy Monad is our connection with Creator God. And when we can realize that, how can we know that how can we not know that we're fearsomely and wonderfully made? How can we not know how important we are in the eyes of God, and that everything we do has importance on earth, or we wouldn't be here? Mm-hmm. And that's why we're here, to work through traumas, to work through whatever we need to work through, to always to fulfill our destiny on the planet in an evolutionary way, each in our own individual way.
Absolutely. And fundamental to New Thought is that belief and understanding that there's nothing that we need to do. And I think that's a lot of problem that we come up against in religion and in spirituality, is that people believe that there's something we must do. And in fact, all we need to do is align our thoughts with the thought of who and what we are. And it crosses all of these lines. And so by simply changing the way that we think and aligning our thought process, we can change our lives dynamically, and we can change ourselves into the positive and affirmative people that we need to be, the empowered people that we need to be, and that we already are if we would simply choose to understand it. And again, fundamental to what we teach and what this movement is all about is the fact that life is, and this life experience is, the school of the soul. And so we really come here, we really lead our lives, we really come into relationship and come into being, and we move through the aspects of challenge and circumstance and situation to learn lessons that strengthen us and empower us. And that's the dynamic and exciting thing about life. And so if we understand that, then the things that worry us and the things that frighten us and the things that defeat us will all melt away, and we'll be able to deal with circumstance and situation. And it doesn't at all mean that the problems are going to go away. It does mean that we're going to get better and better at solving and dealing with those problems, and that eliminates the need that we have to worry. Yes.
And isn't it true, from what you just said, that we go through life on a perception? If our perception is that we're not important, that we're less than the worms or whatever, would people say various things. If our perception is that that's where we are, then that's where we put ourselves. But if our perception is that we soar, that we are a part of God, that there is that divine link in our consciousness, and therefore with the consciousness of all of humanity, that we're all essentially one, we're all equally important, then when we do that, we're better for it, aren't we? And we're nicer to other people.
We are, and we're nicer to ourselves,
yes.
and we are more willing to be loving of ourselves, forgiving of ourselves, tolerant of ourselves, accepting of ourselves, and we accept responsibility for ourselves,
yes.
and accept responsibility for our life, and that takes nothing away from God or from the divine. One of the things that we mix up so often is different theological ideas, and one of them is that we have to do something to make God happy, or that we have to do something to earn some relationship with God. And of course, there is a perspective that teaches that, but that's certainly not consistent with our teaching at all. And we believe that we are already united with the presence and the power of God, and all of us are, and that we are not by nature bad and evil and terrible, but bad and evil and terrible things come out of us in this physical experience. But that hasn't to do with God, that has to do with us, and it has to do with the human condition and the interaction of those of us on the human and the earth plane.
Yes, and I'd like to remind our readers that in this our viewers, in this fast-moving and ever-changing world, what we sometimes most need to do is to just to be quiet, to be still, and therefore we are attuning ourselves automatically with God. But we need to do that more than just to be doing so many things, and keep such a tight schedule and keep doing, but to just learn to be.
Just learn to be and learn to move through a process of self-examination, introspection, quietness, calming, centering ourselves, meditation and prayer, all of those things, none of which take a lot of effort from the outside. And one of the things I'd like our viewers to understand is we're not at all inviting people to go out and get a dozen books on worry and study ways in which they can get rid of this technique or this problem in their life. Instead, we're talking about basic techniques that individuals can apply to their individual lives and solve this problem. And we don't need to intellectualize it, and we don't need to learn it. We need to understand it.
Yeah.
And when we understand it, we need to embrace it, and we need to make it a part of our consciousness and a part of our life. And then we let go of the worries.
Yes, and to feel it, to feel the results. And one of the most essential things we need to do is breathe properly, breathe deeply. Inhaling deeply, and all the hatha yoga and all the yoga techniques are to breathe, inhale through your nostrils and exhale through your mouth. So to occasionally practice that, and when we're exercising, to do it deeply, to inhale very deeply and hold it briefly and then exhale slowly. And when we do that, we're balancing our energies in such a wonderful way.
That's absolutely true. And when we look at people within the movement, within New Thought and metaphysical movements, and we look at the founders of those faiths, Mary Baker Eddy and Ernest Holmes and Charles Fillmore and Nora Brooks and all of the rest, and the New Thought and metaphysical groups, study groups, churches, and organizations that are around, the number of people that are in our movement who are in their 70s and 80s and 90s who are living vibrant, vital lives is really a testament to the fact that this philosophy, when we combine the spiritual with the physical and use these techniques, really does work.
Yes.
And it really does work.
Yes, they say the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the living, and the proof is in the attitude people have toward life and the attitude we have toward ourselves and toward each other. And when our attitude is loving, thoughtful, considerate, accepting, and allowing everyone to do their own, make their own mistakes or have their own special times in the limelight, then we do well.
Mm-hmm. And that is an ability that we all have if we would be conscious of it,
Yeah.
and if we would condition our minds to act and react in that positive and affirmative way.
Yeah. But we need to remember, too, that when we do worry, if we can use it as a stepping stone for positive living, then it's a worthwhile.
Absolutely, and I think we need to leave in the last few minutes discussing the fact that we are all going to worry.
Yes.
I worry, you worry, we all worry. But the key is that we condition ourselves so that we are aware of the fact when worry creeps into our consciousness and into our lives, that we're alerted, that we don't feed on that. And the dynamic of the law of mind action tells us that our minds create after their kind. And so if we allow that to feed and to create more worry, it's going to. So we really need to work on our own individual ability to identify worrisome thoughts, and then in the midst of those worrisome thoughts, stop dead in our tracks and go to some of these techniques of centering, of affirmation, of meditation, of prayer, and of realizing our oneness with the presence and the power of God, and looking at our self-worth and our self-esteem.
Yes, and using that as a stepping stone instead of the stumbling block, and then we do well. And stress is essential in anyone's life, and very famous actors and so forth say that without stress they wouldn't do well. So we can just know that not all of this is negative, not all the stress, not all the worry is negative, but we can use it, as I said earlier, as a stepping stone, not a stumbling block.
Exactly right. And as we talk to people who are in the acting field or people who speak, public speaking, will often say that they get butterflies, they
Yes.
get nervous, they get tense, they perspire. So many people go through these negative, stressful experiences of mind and body, and then when they get on stage or they get behind the microphone or they get behind the podium, that all melts away,
Yes.
and they come to a point of serenity, or the point of bringing through their art and their presence. And that's really has to do with the fact that they understand that that negative aspect is a reality, but it's something that brings them to a preparation, and then they center themselves in who and what they are, and they go on to perform or give a wonderful speech.
Yes, and if we look at that physically, we can see what's happening is they are getting their adrenaline going, their endorphins are picking up, and so changes are in their physical body that they use to project themselves out, as opposed to it's a positive in that way.
It's a positive, and it confirms life.
Yes.
Because life is confirmed through our emotions and
Yes.
through our feelings and through the dynamic of different things that flow through our mind and our heart and our being. And so those are good things, even though they sometimes appear to be bad things.
Yes. So we can make lemonade with our worries and our fears, and not just let it be a lemon. And we can, it's up to each individual how they accept whatever happens in their life. Are they going to accept it as a positive thing that's a step forward, that they'll use as a step forward? Or are they going to let it drag them down? And we have to know, we can think of what's the worst thing that can happen and then find a solution and then go on from there. Or we can just let it be a millstone around our neck.
Right. And the choice is always ours.
Yeah.
And what we talk about on this program is areas of personal responsibility and personal growth. You and I are responsible for who and what we are. We're responsible for where we are, and we're responsible for changing our behavior and changing our lives. The power and the grace of God is complete within each one of us, and the ability to change and take responsibility is ours and ours alone. And so we hope that in this 30 minutes we've shared with you information that's been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
This program is a community outreach of Christ Church. Dr. Mike Costello speaks each Sunday morning at 11 a.m., and Dr. Iris Freelander speaks on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. at the church. On Sunday evenings at 6 p.m., there is a meditation and healing service. Come and join us. You will be warmly welcomed.